gosh, this morning's been so refreshing for me. I know a lot of you guys are just getting started in the industry, but once you're in the industry, like every year feels like 10, and you get tired really quickly, and it's so amazing to hear all the stories of personal fortitude from everyone on so many different fronts, and just how people are fighting for this plant. And we're just part of this like global team, right? We're all doing our parts to make it a big success globally. So I'm going to tell you about our part, and we're going to nerd out about hemp genetics for a few minutes. The first thing I like to say is that, like, again, we're students of this industry. We've been doing this for 3 years, our National Farming Cooperative, and we're learning all about hemp genetics and how the plant is able to be cultivated at scale for CBD specifically. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a couple clarifications, because I've heard a lot of confusion about the different types of hemp and cannabis, and at the end of the day, we're just mincing hairs because it's all cannabis, but because of political issues, we're defining it as certain things, so we're going to define it here so everyone's on the same page. So we have industrial hemp, which is mainly for fiber or grain and industrial uses, which we're going to hear some presentations after me that tell you all about the amazing things it can do, so please stick around for those. This crop has been cultivated a lot longer at scale for agriculture purposes, and the genetics are stable. The plants are the same across the entire field, and we know a lot about how the plant's going to perform. Again, mostly used for fiber and grain. They have some cannabinoid content, but predominantly they're going to be for those industrial applications. They're going to be planted really close together, like a traditional row crop, like corn or wheat. And then when you look at something like medicinal hemp, it looks like marijuana, it smells like marijuana. It's just been bred for a high CBD percentage instead of a high THC percentage. So this is the focus of what we're going to talk about. It lacks stability, and there's still a lot of research that needs to be done. How can we get these plants to perform, cannabinoid-wise, physical traits, which we're going to talk about, at the same style throughout the entire cultivation process. They're going to be planted more like an orchard style, so 5 by 5 or 3 by 3. They're going to grow more like you're planting apple trees as opposed to corn. So there's a different level of care that's involved in taking care of these plants in terms of weed mitigation and harvesting. Again, for high flower yield and high cannabinoid content. So we talk about physical traits with high CBD hemp. There's a couple different things that we're looking at. We're not just looking at cannabinoid content, because we're growing this stuff to try to scale it for this quickly growing industry that has a lot of demand, and we need to find the best plants that grow agriculturally in terms of being able to harvest them, in terms of making sure all the plants are the same size, that they flower accordingly on a regular time period. If you have different phenotypes within one variety that flowers, some in September, some in October, or whatever the fall is here. I'm still learning about the seasons in the Southern Hemisphere. You're going to want to make sure those plants are predictable so that you can have an easier harvest. Another thing is that we've been studying is size of the plants. You don't necessarily need to grow a huge 8-foot plant to get the same amount of yield, because a lot of that is going to be stalk content. So we're looking at smaller plants that are really dense and have a different type of bud architecture that are easier to harvest and end up making the same amount of material. Because when you look at the CBD hemp compared to industrial, like, that's the size of one of our stalks. Like, it's as big as a Coke can or a Pepsi can. You can't just come through and whack that easily, or at least when you're doing 100, 200 acres. And that's the size of one of those like 8-foot plants. So how do you look to some of these smaller varieties to make life easier? 10 minutes left, perfect. Another area that I think is really interesting, and I'm really curious to see how it develops, is how genetics respond across the globe, even in different regions. So like even in America alone, you take plants that were bred in Oregon, you move them to Colorado from a humid climate to a really dry climate. You have different environmental pressures from pests, and the plants respond completely differently. So we have varieties that are some of our favorite strains that grow really fast and tall, but they get eaten by caterpillars. And if there's no bud to harvest in October, then what are you doing? But we can use those strains and breed them into other profiles to bring in some of the traits we do like, and hopefully get some of the pest resistance from other strains that we do like. And this will be different everywhere. So I'm really curious to see how varieties that we have grow in other places because just because the genetic the genetic markers are the same and the plant is the same, it's going to stress and react differently to different environmental climates. So, as much as we do know, we still know nothing, and that's exciting and also frightening. Next, we'll talk about cannabinoid and terpene production, and what is a presentation without a couple cute dog photos? Come on, that's our box here. Again, looking at cannabinoid production through the lens of commercial agriculture because of the demand for CBD globally. One thing that we've been really curious about is cannabinoids over time. So not just knowing what the cannabinoid profile is at the end of harvest, but how it's progressing throughout the entire year. So this is looking at the last 4 weeks of flowering. We had a couple hypotheses here that actually turned out to be wrong. We thought that maybe certain cannabinoids would be produced in different ratios throughout the season because maybe the plant needs certain cannabinoids at different times in its growth cycle, because we have a general understanding of what cannabinoids and terpenes do for the plant itself. But we didn't know, there's so many cannabinoids. Why? It's just that the plant needs this whole cocktail, or different cannabinoids do certain things, prevent against certain things, attract certain things. But what we saw is that the ratios are pretty stable. So your CBD to THC percentage, which is the ratio that a lot of people are interested in the CBD hemp side of things, was pretty stable in that 25 to 35 parts CBD to 1 part THC. One interesting note that we saw that we're really curious about in terms of minor cannabinoid production was that CBC, which is the third most, the third most abundant cannabinoid in many of our profiles, actually spiked towards the end of cultivation compared to CBD and THC. So, food for thought. I'm not sure what that means yet, but that's something that we're curious about. We're also looking at terpenes as we talk about full spectrum benefits. Terpenes are a big part of that cocktail, and we're trying to find out is there ways we can stress the plant to create other terpenes, or if we breed for you can breed for cannabinoid content, so you should be able to breed for terpene content as well. So this is the profile in one of our varieties, and a lot of them show those 3, caryophyllene, myrcene, and bisbolo, as kind of the top 3 of the terpene profile. And we want to start tracking that on a time basis as well. Just they're such small amounts, it's a little more difficult to get, but we hope to get there pretty soon. And then this is more next level, and some people are doing this work in the lab, and this is really interesting. So looking at genetic engineering to assist with minor cannabinoid production. We can do it through breeding, like we've done some CBG work, because there's some industrial varieties that have that only produce CBG. They don't make THC and CBD and those downstreams from those pathways. And you can breed that into high cannabinoid varieties and actually get CBG to start coming up. So we've been doing some of that, which is really neat. But also, do I have a pointer on this? No, it doesn't work. Okay. You can cut off those pathways to CBD and THC by basically turning off those enzymes with genetic engineering, and you might just be able to have CBG accumulate in the cell, or maybe only CBC accumulate in the cell. So those are other areas that are going to start to come around now. And again, it's so interesting to see how that's going to affect our full spectrum oils downstream, because what is changing the cannabinoid desires in the plant due to the terpene content or due to the way the plant grows. So just because we have all these cool chemical components, what's that mean for the vigor of the plant physically? Is it going to be a healthy plant in the field? Is it going to be resistant to pests? These are all the questions that, again, are unanswered, and really excited to see how that develops. 6 minutes, cool. Other considerations when looking at hemp genetics, I've heard a lot. The second most common misinformation I keep hearing is I can grow 4 crops outside over the course of the year. There's certain types of cannabis that are autoflower varieties that will just trigger to start flowering on their own. A lot of these originated in high mountainous regions in Central Asia, where the stress of the environment, winter, can come really fast and hard. So plants want to react to that quickly and procreate. So okay, let's go, let's start making flower. But most of the strains that we have, most of the classic especially on the marijuana side, these classic commercial marijuana varieties, which is where we got a lot of these high CBD varieties from, are on photoperiod. So they're going to go based on the light cycle going to less than 12 and 12. So that only happens in the fall, once a year. So unless you're doing an autoflower crop in like a warm climate where you might be able to get 2 runs and the plants will be very, very small, your best bet is to plant in a lot of one photoperiod and just doing one harvest. But if anyone can figure it out and do that, and I'm curious and super pumped, so let's figure it out. Feminization is another area of research in the seed world, so making feminized seeds, and then that's basically taking female plants, transitioning them into males so that they produce pollen with no male chromosomes, and then they can pollinate regular females and make feminized seeds to lessen the male count to like 1 in 10,000 in your field. And that's an area that's obviously interesting because if we have no seeds in the crop or less seeds in the crop, we'll have no flower production. An interesting thing that we've found in the research, though, is that your seed bracts, which are the floral component that covers the seed, like the seed pod, actually have a higher level of cannabinoids than flower without seeds in it, so like empty seed pods. So that's a really interesting thing that we found. So like our thought was, okay, maybe you grow regular cannabis that has seeds in it and you just sort the seeds out after, and all those bracts that get collected, you'll have less flower in the end, but it'll have a higher cannabinoid content. So that's something that I would urge people to look into as well. The 2 areas of uncertainty that I'm super curious about is like this plant is so adaptive and it grows in 6 continents and all these things. How is it going to respond to all these different environments when we start introducing genetics that have been cultivated in one place into other areas? The genetics only take the plant so far, and then environmental stress will kind of push and pull it in different directions. So that's really interesting. And that has to do with climate, with the type of water, minerals in the water, altitude where we're growing on, longitude, latitude. So we'll see where that goes. Some last food for thought. Sourcing CBD genetics in this environment right now is a little bit sketchy still. There's a lot of people out there that are going to try to sell you, a bunch of seeds. You have no idea what's in it. We've all kind of have our battle scars if we've been in the industry long enough. I know we do. So be careful when you're sourcing. Make sure that you are vetting these suppliers and asking good questions. Ask to see data. Go visit the farm, see how they grow. All these types of things are really important. Can we make a triple-use crop? Can we have a hemp genetic that performs the tensile strength of an industrial fiber variety, can make really good grain for oil production, and you can take the seed bracts, for example, and make cannabinoids? I'm not sure. Timing of harvest is very, very different for a lot of these varieties. So like in Kazakhstan, for example, where we've done some industrial hemp, you leave the crop in the ground till February, and you can actually let it like rot in the field naturally. At that point, all your flower, all your seeds have dropped, there's nothing left, and then you harvest the fiber. So it's not just about if we can get a genetic that can do all 3 things really well, but that we can have a genetic or harvesting strategy with all these things is going to be also challenging. So I'm not sure if that's feasible, but because when you look at a lot of different crops, you have crops that do one thing, or you have a certain type of corn that's for fodder, and you have a certain type of corn that you eat. But I wouldn't be surprised if we figure something out. I know we can do dual, but can we do all 3? And then the other piece of activism that I really want to push on is like the CBD hemp laws across the world are still being written. The U.S. has a draft out, but the ink isn't dry yet. Like, there's not a public safety issue by raising the THC level to 1% from 0.2 in the EU, I think it is, or 0.3 in the US. We're mixing definitions to begin with, but we can grow a lot higher cannabinoid content if we push it up to 1%, and the research and the medicine that we create downstream because of those inputs is going to be so much more valuable. So I really urge, if there's any lobbying going on, or if you have those areas of connection, like try to educate people on high CBD hemp being at a 1% THC threshold, and that's my stump speech on that. So that's me. Thanks, guys.
That's Stephen Turetsky. Thanks, Stephen. Very much appreciate it.